Good morning. I am here with Ann Boston Walker, who is a great woman of our city, very influential, a person who has been a mentor to me over the last couple of years, and invited me in her home, and has really shared a lot of history and with me a lot of accomplishments just of African American um, um, influences in our city, and she was just recently named Woman of the Year, recognized by our city downtown just recently. And I'll let her share a little bit more about that and some of her accomplishments, and then we can proceed with our little history here of Bethany Presbyterian Church.
Actually, it was recognizing during March as Woman of the Year and by the City Council here in Columbus, Ohio, and it was quite an honor, an humbling one actually, because it was the first time the City Council had done something of that sort. But recently, November 1st, actually on my birthday, the Borough Development Company asked me if I would accept having my name placed on a building that they are erecting. This is will be a combination of housing and businesses. And in recognition of all that I have tried to do to make this a community where all are recognized for whatever gifts they have. And so I did say yes to that. Uh, but perhaps on a personal level, the AARP, is concerned about the attitudes that seniors have about aging. And they have a program, a national program called Disrupt Aging. So once again, I was chosen as the first in the state um, who disrupts aging.
Mm.
At 96, I do not act the way people expect me to act, whatever that is. And so they thought that I was a fitting example. And I really appreciated that because I think that one has an obligation to be involved as long as you can and to share whatever gifts you have as much as you can. So that's the story of Ann Boston Walker.
Well, we thank you for that brief history. We know Ann Walker has her name and her face on the city wall off of Long Street downtown. So her accomplishments are many, and her resume, her vita, is would fill up many pages. So we thank you for that, and we bring her here to this interview. Um, as a part of our study in looking at the history of Bethany Presbyterian Church. And she is um, very instrumental, her family, and the work that they had done back around the early 20th century to establish this church, which comes out of a specific context. And Bethany Presbyterian Church is a historic African American church. So we will begin now with our first question, which can you share to the best of your knowledge what the world was like during the birth of Bethany Presbyterian Church?
Bethany came into existence at the time of the Great Migration. And the Great Migration was around 1916, 17, and 18. Uh, Blacks were moving from the south to the north. My mother, for instance, was an RN, and she came here to work in the Black Hospital, which was at that time located as long as 17th Street. Um, Certainly, Ohio was a free state, but even so, um, they only accepted so many black students in an institution. Ohio State, for instance, would accept just 2 blacks in the medical school. And so those professionals who wanted to establish a business had to go south for staff. So Dr. Method had to go south to get nurses to work in his hospital. And my mother was one of them. And so she came as part of the Great Migration to Ohio. Others went farther north. They came as Presbyterians. In the South, they had their own churches, their own institutions. And so they came north, and because Ohio was a free state, they expected to find more freedom than what really existed. Those Presbyterians found that there were no black Presbyterian churches. Those Presbyterians found that very few white Presbyterian churches accepted them. Those black Presbyterians found that if they were accepted, they either sat in the balcony, they sat in the back of the church, they did not participate in the church as officers. And so in the Columbus community, this group of black Presbyterians said, we will build our own church.
Okay, so these group of blacks, African Americans that came from the South, did they initially settle, I guess, became members of Broad Street Presbyterian Church originally?
They attended Broad Street Presbyterian Church.
Okay.
They held on the corner of Garfield. Broad Street is on the corner of Garfield and Broad Street. A block north, you have Bethany, the group that eventually became Bethany, meeting in a hall on the corner of Garfield and Long. And they met as a prayer band originally. And then when they became a part, or when they attended Broad Street Presbyterian Church and found out that they could not become active members of the church.
On the basis of what?
On the color of their skin. Because certainly they were educated, you see, and there were certainly some members of Broad Street at that time that did not have the educations the blacks had. But because they were black, and because they came from a slave background, maybe their parents or their grandparents, they were not accepted. And so then they applied to the national church and asked that a black church be organized in Columbus, Ohio. And this was around 1917.
Okay, so can you share a little bit more about context here? The blacks that were migrating to the north, believing that it was going to be more freedom, there was going to be some more social, political flexibility, and the north was going to be more supportive racially.
Yeah.
As I'm hearing in this particular segment here, that necessarily wasn't the case.
Oh, without a doubt, it was not the case. And not just Presbyterian churches. It was true, the Methodist church and the Baptist, etc. But with the Presbyterian church, it's always been a middle class, an upper middle class church. And so they felt that the white church felt it had to maintain that. And even though there were professionals who came here to work, for instance, my mother she was an RN. She had a younger sister who was a musician, and she eventually was one of the pianists for Bethany. They were accepted for their skills, but they were not accepted fully as Christians.
Can you say that fully as
Christians?
As Christians.
And so, as I said, they petitioned the national church to establish a black church in Columbus. And the members who were interested came from Georgia, from North Carolina, South Carolina, from the South in general. And the majority of them were professional people, lawyers, teachers, that sort of thing.
Yes, ma'am. So do you remember the year Bethany was initially established? And can you share something about those first members of Bethany during that time?
Well, you had to realize that I was a little child.
Yeah.
Okay? But to answer your question in part, the early members of Bethany, well, first, after the Reverend Lee was sent here from the national office, he found that this group of 23 people were really and sincerely interested in establishing a church. So he said to the national office that we should establish a black church in Columbus, Ohio. And as they looked around for property on which to build this church, they found a lot there on Garfield between Long and Mount Vernon. And this was a lot that the city had planned to put a school on. And so the group of interested people convinced the city that we would like to establish a church here. And they bought the lot. I think it cost like $1,200. And that was a lot of money in 1917, 1918. Nevertheless, and this was a neighborhood of doubles and twin houses. But the city sold them the land, and they built the church in 1918. And in 2020, the church is still on the original lot.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
So, in establishing this particular church in 1918, there were some definite barriers. So, looking back, considering the barriers, the racial barriers, we have Jim Crow era, we have situations in some communities where blacks couldn't even be outside after dark. I can only imagine that establishing this church meant a lot for the people and the community. Can you share what this church has meant to the Mount Vernon area where the church sits at right now, or the Bronzeville
in
area?
the early days of the church, this was a neighborhood, a well-established neighborhood, and it was a black neighborhood. But because the church this was a middle-class neighborhood, so it was black. It was a neighborhood, black and middle class. The church was middle class because the Presbyterian church throughout is middle class. So once they were organized, the members of the church reached out to the surrounding communities closer to Mount Vernon, for instance, and they helped the poor. I remember as a youngster how in Sunday school we had to bring canned goods. That's how far back, helping the outside community. We would bring that to Sunday school. We would bring extra pennies, a nickel, to Sunday school because it was going to the poor. So we were working in mission in the surrounding communities. We didn't have to reach out to Africa or reach out to Europe. We worked within the community, and I remember one woman who lived across the street from the church, Carrie Shepherd. And Carrie Shepherd, Mrs. Shepherd, was always collecting something for the poor, whether it was clothing, food, or extra pennies. And so Bethany became involved in the community. The members, I think, in spite of their middle-class background, in spite of their professional background, they recognized that there were people who came as part of the Great Migration, but they were not as successful. And so they needed help.
Yes,
and the church was always willing to help.
So we have a church established in the crucible of this racial divide in America, and in that tension, Bethany is becoming is becoming a beacon of light and hope for the underprivileged.
Well, not only that, they accepted reins of leadership. Uh, Bethany ministers were very active in the early civil rights groups. Bethany ministers would run, or had the audacity to run for a political office. They became leaders in the community. And in 1937, Mayor Gessman was the mayor of Columbus, and he wanted to keep a very close contact, or he wanted to establish a very close contact with the black community. And so he established the rules and guidelines for a separate election. Now, politically, it did not have the recognition that, say, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or even independents had. But on the other hand, when he established this election so that we had a black mayor, and Reverend Scarborough, who happened to be the pastor at Trinity Baptist Church at that time, became the black mayor in 1937, I believe, of Columbus.
Wow.
So it meant then that the white institution, political institution, had a close contact with the black community through its elected officers. It was, at that time, the area was called Bronzeville because that represented the color of the skin of those folk living in the area. And it was one of a number of cities across the country that had a section called Bronzeville.
Thank you for that history. And in light of, we're now celebrating Martin Luther King birthday, and it's becoming a national holiday. And also we're coming up to February where we celebrate African American history, contribution, and ingenuity, energy, and spirit, all these energies and cultures that frame African American life. As I understand it, you had opportunity to interview Martin Luther King.
Oh, well, that was in 1959. First, Coretta, his wife, and my husband were very good friends, and they had worked together. So when Martin came to Columbus, she had said to him, be sure to look up the Walkers. Okay. But not only that, he had said he wanted to be interviewed by a black reporter. Well, the major institutions like broadcasting, radio or television, the daily paper, the white paper, did not have blacks on the staff. But there was a black newspaper called the Sentinel, and I happened to work for it. And so I was asked by Channel 6, which was the ABC station, if I would do an interview with Martin, and I said yes. Okay.
Awesome. And so, lastly, can you just share just a little bit about what Bethany has meant to you as an African American woman growing up through some pretty turbulent times, and it's not that things have been, well, certainly there have been better racially, but we still know that there's still this kind of energy.
The Presbyterian Church is still a racist church. It is, I think it talks a good game in terms of being interracial, intercultural, but in many instances it is not. And it's unfortunate because blacks who, in the early days particularly, who became Presbyterians because of the families that owned them, you see. And so the feeling has been that once they, I guess the word I can use is ape themselves after the masters, they thought then that they would be fully accepted. And this is 2020, and it has not happened completely, has not happened to this day. I think that to be a Christian is to be a Christian, but to be a Christian in the Presbyterian sense means that you have to accept the white way of thinking and acting and doing, and it should not be that way. I think that well, let me say one other thing before I forget, because you know, at my age I will forget things. Bethany has been a second home for me because I grew up without a mother. So there were women in the church who adopted me and took care of me. There was one woman when I was in college who sent me $1 a month. And there were times that I thought, what can I do with this dollar? But then there were other times when I was so glad to get it. As I grew older, I realized how much she loved me. There was another woman in the church who would send me clothing because my father, who raised us, dressed me in pleated skirts and midi blouses. I didn't have the little frilly blouses and dresses that other little girls had. And she recognized that. And so she would send me, she had a cleaning establishment. And I guess when people would bring things and leave them, etc., she would say, well, this is something Ann can use. So Bethany was a home for me. It wasn't until I guess I was in high school that I realized how racist the Presbyterian Church was. And then because of camps, because of youth programs, you know, and I remember one time I was scheduled to go to a youth program, and I was called at the last moment and said that I would not be able to attend. Someone was going to pay the fees. I don't know now who it was. But later on I learned that I was not going because I was black, and they had no other black youth to go. Well, let's skip a few years later, and my children had the same experience. So today, we have a self-development of people committee. The people who are being self-developed are all white. 101 years later, you still have one black church in the presbytery. What does that say? I think that if the Presbyterian Church could accept African Americans as they are, their culture, just as they accept the Asians, just as they accept any other cultural group, then we would feel fully integrated into the Presbyterian Church. I remember I used to be active in the National Black Presbyterian Caucus. And after several years, I thought, why am I spending my time and my wheels being a part of this? Either I'm a part of the church or I'm not. And I realized that sometimes I speak too openly. too directly. I used to be appointed to various committees, but this doesn't happen now, and I know it's because they're tired of hearing Ann Walker sing the same song. But it isn't just Ann Walker. It's any number of members who don't really feel satisfied in terms of their is it word religiosity. So what do we do about it? I don't think we need to establish a national black Presbyterian church. I think what we need to do is to say to the Presbyterian Church, we accept this group of people just as we do other groups. We accept them, we accept their culture, we embrace them as part of being as part of our church, being Presbyterian. And I honestly believe that. And certainly at this point in my life, I feel that I have to say this. I have to say it to young people, and I have to say it to middle-aged people, and I have to say it to elderly people, because if I don't say it, and if others don't say it, then we're going to lose the few that we have that are a part of the system. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much, Ann Boston Walker, for this particular history that is very important in understanding how our particular African American community has grown through the church, how it has been influenced, but also how the world and our social political environment has also shaped the character of this particular church, Bethany Presbyterian Church, and the ongoing racial tension that is still a part of it. And so we thank you for the information that you have given us, and it certainly will allow us to begin to critically think about where the state of our Presbyterian Church is now, and as we have this ongoing argument. Thank you so much, Ann Walker, for your contribution to Bethany and to the city.
Let me say this.
Yes, ma'am.
In the early 60s, the Presbyterian Church said we want to integrate, we want to diversify, we want to become more of a intercultural church. And so they came to Bethany, as they did to other black churches around the country, I'm sure. But they came to Bethany and asked members if they would leave Bethany and become a part of the white churches throughout the Presbytery of Scioto Valley. So when they came to me, and several people came to me from several churches, and I said no. I said, I'm not going to leave Bethany. If I have anything to contribute, it's going to Bethany, you see. And we did have we had a couple of school teachers who left Bethany and went to several of the white churches, became members there, and when they died, they were funeralized from that church. But my feeling was that you don't have to destroy the black church to build up the white church. And so I was not willing to leave Bethany. I thought whatever talents I have, whatever skills I have, whatever experiences I can bring to being a member of Bethany, then I should stay here. And so at this point, I'm the oldest member, not chronologically, but in terms of membership of Bethany. And I continue to feel that I have a job to do.
Yes.
And so as long as I have the grace and the willpower and the physical stamina to do it, I'll be there.
And Bethany has contributed greatly to your work, your influence.
Oh, to my worth as a person, without a doubt.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh.
Yes, ma'am. And even now, you still run the community luncheon that even now you still serve, and it feeds at least an average of 100 or so people each week.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I was on the committee for the poor, and what we were trying to do is to get the homeless off of the land into housing. And in the process, I discovered that there were no services around Bethany, where there had been when I was a youngster growing up. All of a sudden, there were no services. The neighborhood had been changed, and there were a number of homeless people in the area. So I thought, well, we could at least once a week serve them hot soup, sandwich, and dessert. And I say that because we had tried a food pantry, and that had not worked. So I started that program 14 years ago and asked my son, who's a chef, if he would help, and a couple other people in the church, and they said yes. And they were eating so much soup, we realized that they needed a balanced meal. So then we applied to the Mid-Ohio Food Bank, got on their list, and but we didn't become a part of the church budget because as a small church, Bethany could not afford to have us as a part of the budget. So I just began raising the money, and people gave me money for my birthday, for instance. It became a part of our, it became the money for the lunch program. And then various churches would have food drives, and they would give us the food, you see. And so now, 14 years later, we continue to exist and to feed the people in the area. We also do a food ministry. Once or twice a year, I'll go out to the barber school